Thanks so much.
So, so to our attendees, at this point, I'm going to turn it over for our next panel to Allison Wilner. And as I mentioned, kicking things off, Allison is our incoming chair of MedTech Women. Allison has been on the advisory board for MedTech Women since the beginning. And she has been instrumental in helping us build this platform, from chairing conferences to leading programming. She is a friend and a leader in the field and is passionate about helping women executives. So I am so honored that you said yes. And I think we've got a great platform to build a leadership continuum for MedTech Women Advance, for women, you know, who are younger in their careers and want to gain leadership experiences. I think Allison's going to be announcing and rolling out all sorts of new ways for people to get involved and to engage the community. So, so Allison, I'll turn it over to you, but thank you for everything you've done for this platform, and we're all excited to support you during your tenure.
Thank you so much, Tiffany, for those very kind words. I don't know how anyone could possibly follow in your footsteps, so appreciate all the support that you've given to me, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that tomorrow. But that panel was fantastic, ladies. Thank you so much. Really good information here, and I'm very excited to introduce to you my panel, which is a kind of a follow-on to the panel that you just heard. First of all, we've had some great insights already about kind of taking that leap and becoming an entrepreneur, but the next panel is all about, okay, you've decided, you're in, congratulations, now you're an entrepreneur, so what's next? And I have the great honor of being able to include Paul Fitzpatrick and Amy Baxter, who I'll introduce in just a moment, as the panelists here. And they have a lot of information to share. So these are people who are really experienced, who have been through and probably taken beatings and probably felt like they've been through the ringer a few times. Lots of great experience to share. And so I hope that you will make this an interactive panel. I hope you will drop your questions into the chat room. If you have things that you're struggling with as an entrepreneur, or you have some things you don't know how to deal with, I mean, that's the importance of our network, right? Being able to tap into people who have some experience and be able to give us some advice about what they would do in your situation. I particularly liked what Ezra Rowan said a few minutes ago. I actually wrote it down. It says, you're doing something that hasn't been done before. I love that. This is why some of this is hard. It hasn't been done before. And so you're doing something for the first time. So tapping into people who have been through a similar ringer and can help you advise, to figure it all out is really fantastic. So with that, let me just introduce you to my two panelists, my esteemed panelists here. Amy Baxter, who is a physician by training, but also the founder and CEO of Pain Care Labs, which is based here in Atlanta, Georgia. It's funny, my daughter used Amy's Buzzy device here a few years ago to help with her gymnastics pain, and it was fantastic, and loved that. And I've really enjoyed, one day my children are a little obsessed with Shark Tank, got to see Amy on Shark Tank, and they're going, oh my gosh, Mom, look, this person's from Atlanta, Georgia. And I'm like, I know her. So Amy is fantastic with a lot of incredible experience to bring to the table, who has really blazed a path. And Paul, similarly, is incredibly experienced and a real gift to us on this panel. Not only does he have experience with his company, Advanced Catheter Therapies, which is a Chattanooga-based research and development device company, and he also has been a founding member of SEMDA from many years back, and he has been involved in both SEMDA and MedTech Women. I remember on many occasions him be supporting our organization. So you guys have a couple of really experienced entrepreneurs here who can offer a lot of great advice. So I just wanted to welcome them both. Thank you both so much for giving your time to us today, to your guidance and your time, and also help our potential entrepreneurs be willing to take the leap, and also to leverage and get some experience from, you know, some of your advice about their upcoming experience. So with that, I'm going to pause. I'm sure that everyone's tired of hearing me talk. So I just want to take a minute to just ask Paul and Amy to just give us a little backdrop. I just gave a brief introduction, but what else would you like them to know about your introduction to people who haven't met you before, but know that you have something to share on the entrepreneurial side? Paul, would you like to start us off?
Sure, be happy to. So thanks very much, Allison. And it's a pleasure to be here, and really enjoyed the prior panel. They gave a lot of great insights if you're thinking about, actually, whether you're thinking about starting a business or you're an existing entrepreneur. So I have kind of a diverse background, entrepreneurial background. I actually started my healthcare career as a professional paramedic trained in Los Angeles. And it's a strange road to where I've gotten, you know, being involved with 10 plus different startups on the healthcare services side and the medical device side. But really it was all about, in those days, and I'm going to year date myself, I'm not that old, but it was at a time in New England where I grew up in Massachusetts where paramedicine wasn't a thing. But it was on the West Coast. And so I found a training program out in Los Angeles, became a board certified paramedic. But there was a real unmet need back in my hometown. And I moved back at a time where they were trying to get paramedic programs off the ground. And I just literally stumbled into a program where they were just trying to find paramedics because there weren't any really. I went, applied to a board made up of 3 different competitive hospitals in a particular area of Massachusetts. And next thing I knew, they said, hey, we need somebody to take this thing from ideation and commercialize it and put it together. And they said, would you be interested? And at the time, I really had no training to do any of that, but said, sure, what the heck, you know? And next thing I knew, I was hired to design, develop, and implement that particular program. And that was really my first entrepreneurial experience, putting something in place where there wasn't something, right? And meeting this unmet need. And that just led into doing it again for another group of hospitals outside of Boston. That led then to me hanging out a shingle and providing consulting services in the field, which then led to the next opportunity, which was a very large roll-up play in the ambulance business, where we acquired about 36 companies and that took that public and sold to our largest competitor. And then the founder of that company and I and a couple other folks started another roll-up play, which brought me down to Georgia. And so we started another company in the physical therapy space. Anyways, it was just sort of one continuum of, you know, opportunities to be involved in startups and things like that took me sort of into the entrepreneurial world, and have had a lot of exciting times and some, you know, some trauma here and there, but have survived so far. Anyways.
Love that. That's fantastic, Paul. And Amy also has quite an experience. I couldn't possibly do it justice in a short introduction. So Amy, what would you share with people about the road that you've been on since you decided to become an entrepreneur?
Well, I started as a pediatric emergency doctor and did a fellowship in child abuse, did a fellowship in clinical research, did a fellowship in emergency medicine. And my husband then said, I can't do any more fellowships, I need to get a real job. So then I stayed at UT Southwestern. But I had always been interested in not just suffering, but kind of unnecessary suffering. So the first big thing I did was to validate a nausea scale for children with cancer, because I thought that the pain scale was pretty funny, and useful for kids who can't talk too much about explain how they feel, but knowledge is even more important because kids really can't talk about something abstract like that. So I created and validated that, and then I saw a need in suffering from needles. And so as a pediatrician, I think it's funny, Allison, because you talked about my Buzzy device, which is going hot and heavy right this second because of flu shots, but it is a specific frequency of vibration and ice. You put it on for about 30 seconds, it desensitizes, you put it up and get the flu shot, or I was thinking flu shots, but then it spread to IV Access, then it spread to Quest Diagnostics, then it spread to all of the biologic companies that are doing everything from Humira to Enbrel. But the funny thing is that a lot of our patients started using it for musculoskeletal issues. So you said your daughter used it for gymnastics, and our path, I stayed, by the way, in medicine until 2016. So I think we're probably win the Turtle Award for entrepreneurship. I founded the company in 2006, and primarily that was so that I could get an SBIR grant for funding. So I didn't feel like I had time to go raise money. I just wanted to, if it was worth doing, it was worth having the government pay for it. So got a small business innovative research. But the funny thing is that we started with needles and then have now moved to elbows and knees, and it's the same device inside, it's the same frequency, but we've repackaged it. So I'm now, like Paul was, in the physical therapy segment, which is a really interesting journey to have gone from. So we are now, we started as MMJ Labs, apropos to our last panel and involving our kids. My kids are Max, Miles, and Jill. So when they were young and we were starting, they would go to the trade shows with me. They were the eponymous, the namesakes of the company. Then they got older, they're all now in college, and MMJ now stands for medical marijuana. So we rebranded a couple of years ago to be Pain Care Labs to really talk a little bit more about what we do. But at this point, we are very much in the adherence and the needle procedure markets. And we're also in a number of different channels for everything from silver sneakers to people reducing opioids after surgeries, particularly ACL surgeries. Extremities are where we're really good. And now I'm a full-time CEO.
Yeah, yeah, it's
Fantastic.
funny. It's funny because I think a lot of times when people get asked to be on a panel or participate in a panel, and I know you guys have done this before, but a lot of times they don't even realize that they've gotten somewhere where other people want to be. You're just like, and now I'm a CEO. Like, as it turns out, it just here I am.
Well, you know, to that point, Allison, in my wildest dreams, many years ago as just a staff paramedic, that's all I envisioned was I was going to live, breathe, and die as just a field staff paramedic. And, and the evolution has been relatively fast and just brought, and I never expected it. I mean, much like Amy, I never expected to be a CEO or a founder or, I tell people I've gotten my MBA just purely on the job with a lot of good mentors and things like that, and a real learning curve.
Do you get pulled, Paul, into anything related to emergency medicine? Like, do you still treat people in your neighborhood? Because I got to admit, my background's in academia, and I've recently, with COVID, I've gotten pulled into, we're doing a randomized controlled trial in Augusta for a theory I have about mitigating COVID. So even though I'm doing my day job, there's still this pull to what I did originally. Do you ever have that?
I don't really, other than, once in a while, an old EMS colleague will give me a call up and they're more now looking on the business side. They want to do an acquisition, so I'll help them do that, but not on the clinical side. I was an ACLS instructor. I taught at Northeastern University. I was in that sector for about nearly 20 years, and it was my life. But that was some time ago. I'd probably be dangerous right now if somebody handed me a laryngoscope or a needle or whatever. But I don't, other than the business side that now.
It's so funny. Well, let's talk about this for a second, because I was thinking about both of you and your stories, and I was thinking about people on the call and people who might listen to this talk later. Because, there are a lot of people who start off as entrepreneurs, but who don't end up in the situation that you're in, where they've, had successes and their companies have taken off and they've been able to make things happen. So I I'm going to assume a part of that was attributable to your ecosystem and the people that you had around you and the people that you tapped into along the way. So I'm just curious, who are those people in your ecosystem? How did you find them, and how did you build relationships with them?
Well, I'm going to start on this one. I think that the most valuable person in my ecosystem was Tiffany. And I met her really early when she was just getting started with GCMI. So the whole spectrum of regulatory and what it takes, you know, I put together a whole bunch of different vibrating motors and tested them out, and then stuck some duct tape on it and a little set of dealy bobbers, and that was my prototype. And so the concept of having the design specification and all of the other aspects of it, I wouldn't have known any of those kinds of things without her. And then along the way, Georgia, as I've said in lots of panels before, has one of the richest, particularly medical design, but just entrepreneurial ecosystems. So the University of Georgia has a small business development center. We got to take exporting classes through them. GDEC, I mean, the Georgia Department of Economic Development is also tremendous in their exporting, their Globe Awards. Metro Atlanta Chamber has a contest for exporting, and about half of the people that win the exporting awards were former recipients of the MACOT grants. So I think that you know, sort of there's a lot that feeds into itself, and we've also gotten a lot, because we do a lot of exporting, from the U.S. Commercial Services. So that, I mean, ATDC, but there's just so many four-letter acronyms in the Atlanta area that have been invaluable parts of our training and growth.
Yeah, so I'm just making myself a note right now. Jason, maybe what we can do is put together some kind of a list of some resources for the people on the call.
Sure.
Yeah, I think that would be really helpful. A lot of the ones Amy just rattled off the top of their head, there may be people out there that aren't familiar with them and maybe need to look into them. Good stuff. How about you, Paul? Who's in your ecosystem and how'd you find them?
So, you know, much like Amy, very much the same list, but I think, so there was a period of time where I was actually on the West Coast, came back to Atlanta, and sort of had to engage in the ecosystem here in the Southeast. And candidly, and this is not to, you know, to plug SEMDA or now Southeast Life Sciences, but it's been a phenomenal resource to me, and it's in particular with advanced catheter therapies. I mean, I needed some help on PR, you know, and reached out to Lynn Hood, you know, at Crackerjack Marketing, reimbursement, you know, Tamnet and Art Spalding. And I'll come back to a story about Art. Just getting some advice and looking to, at an earlier stage, to help me with positioning the company at one point to try to find a strategic partner, you know, Hatch Medical with Paul Gianeschi. And I can go on and on and on, but literally this ecosystem for me and all these resources literally were part of SEMDA. Now, I happen to be fortunate to be on the board of SEMDA, which led me to do that. But if the one piece of advice I can give to any entrepreneur is really embrace networking. Get involved in these associations. They're there for a reason and can be just a wealth of information. It's one conversation that always leads to another conversation, and you just never know where that that resource will take you. You know, and now I'm involved in not only Advanced Catheter Therapies is based in Chattanooga, Tennessee. So now I have the ecosystem of Tennessee as well as Georgia. So you've got Life Sciences of Tennessee, which is a great resource as well. They've got a mentoring program, you know, and again, still you've got Georgia Bio and you've got SEMDA and so on. So.
Yeah, and I see people, Amy, thank you so much. You've included a great list there in the chat window. So I would encourage everybody here, this is a great starting point of resources that you can use for different moments, different milestones in your experience. And the other part I'm going to encourage you on is the people on this call, the people in this conference, are all people who are part of the ecosystem. Get to know them and I encourage you to reach out and take these little tiny steps to just start to familiarize yourself with them. It's amazing what a tiny little step can do to the trajectory of your company or your life. Fantastic, guys. Another thing I wanted to expand on a little bit is something that I happen to know, Amy, a couple of people in your network that I had worked with previously, and Paul, you mentioned as well, trying to find people, resources that are going to be part of your team. Let's talk a little bit about, sometimes you can hire them, sometimes you have money. Very often, as I can't remember if it was Jen or Ezra that mentioned, a lot of times startups don't have money. So how did you get creative? You know, when you found people that you wanted to engage with, or you found people that you wish you could hire, but maybe you don't have the budget right now available to hire them. Can you talk about some creative ways that you've worked with people that you wanted to kind of pull into your company, but had to get creative about how you did that? Who wants to start?
Sure. I can take a stab at that. I mean, you know, so what I've done in the past, and you know, startups and being an entrepreneur is all about cash is king, right? Throttling up and throttling back. And I've been very fortunate to have folks who are interested in what I'm doing or what we're doing be so vested in it, they're willing to take some risk alongside of me and our investors and the board. And so sometimes what I would do is negotiate with them that their compensation might be based a certain proportion or percentage would be based on cash that the company could afford and its cash flow, but maybe they would get the other part, you know, in a convertible note that I have an offering going on, or perhaps some stock, whether that be an option or an actual grant of stock. And I have found those over the years to be, you know, very useful tools if in fact the player really believes in what you're doing and willing to take a chance with you. And then some people are going to say, no, I can't do that. I need, you know, here's my fee, and it is what it is, and they're not going to budge off of that. If I do go down that road, I typically spiff it a little bit, you know, so maybe give a little bit more than the going rate in terms of an equity piece on that sort of thing, and then you know, and then the same thing with the convertible note.
Great. How about you, Amy?
Yeah, we were really fortunate, and you know, one thing that is a huge deal. I mentioned the SBIR before, but for me, as an academic and a medical device person, I really wouldn't have done this if there weren't the funding behind it, in part because of the validity that the grant gives you. And so that was a big part of feeling that this was the right path to go on, was that there was grant money that could be allocated for it. So I think that certainly doing a clinical trial as part of research and development for a medical device isn't for everybody, but it really was something that made me feel I was on solid footing for starting off with this company. The other thing was that even having applied for it is something that was valuable, because one of the design companies that we talked to, and we went to Continuum out in Boston, we went to IDEO, we actually traveled to a lot of different places at the beginning to find a good design firm. And it turned out that Formation Design, which was in Atlanta, had a passion for what we were doing. And so they were willing to give us a very discounted rate with the contingency that if we got the grant, we would make them whole. And so that's what happened. So I think that there's a little bit of doing two things at once and leveraging some legitimacy from one place is like, look, you know, if we do get this, then this will be the outcome. Certainly, having been in the medical system at Scottish Rite, my two oldest employees who both started on the same day, one was a friend of a neighbor, and one had worked with me at Scottish Rite as a nurse, and we saved a life together. So you think that you do that all the time in the hospital, but honestly, since you're trained to do it, you don't really notice them unless there's something spectacular and weird. And so Val and I had a spectacular and weird save, and that part of the ecosystem was something. But to be honest, as a female CEO, I also am more and more aware of how much I took advantage of the fact that these very professional, trained women wanted to be there for their children, and the default in their family scenarios for various reasons was that they were the ones who would have to stay home to have that happen, to have their kids be parented the way they wanted. And so I was really able to get amazing talent on the cheap. It was a long time before I was able to pay them what their market rates were. And the trade-off was not equity. The trade-off was flexibility and time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think, Amy, I think that's a great point. You know, one of the things I've done, and again, advanced cath therapies is one of those. Most of our team, and we're a very small, kind of nimble team, have provided fractional service. And so they will come on and they would commit to a certain number of days per month that they could provide service to at a certain fee. But in exchange, they have the flexibility to have other projects going along that will help substitute their own cash flow. And I've never once had an issue with commitment or time performance. So if there was a deadline for something, right, they always stepped up to the plate and said, okay, here's the deadline, even though they're technically fractional. And also, you know, and they had a piece of the company as well. But, you know, just like you said before, you know, you know, it paid off in the end for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, it's great when you have sometimes within your network, there's a spark that happens, and that makes things come to life. And you can't always force that spark to happen. But let's shift for a second and talk about a moment where you had a milestone coming up and you had to get it done, but you really had no experience and no one in your network who could help with that. So you didn't have that spark with anybody. You were going to have to go out and really, you know, start banging at doors, cold calling, as we would say in sales. You know, how are you going to resolve this milestone? Can you guys think of a milestone yourselves where you had that situation and how you dealt with it, how you approached it to get past it?
I mean, you know, we've got some right now. I need to apply for a HCPCS code. Who do I go to? So yes, you can say, have you met my friend LinkedIn? But I think that's one of the biggest things about the ecosystem here is I can call Tiffany and get 3 names. I can talk to somebody who's working with me in a different forum, but see who they recommend. So I think that the milestones and the support are really just about networking and connections. And I think that one thing that Ezra said that was really neat was the concept of really the making relationships. I think that in medicine in particular, it's not our mode. You know, you're used to training new people who are younger, you're used to being trained by people who are older, but in terms of having a collegial interaction, I mean, heck, in emergency medicine, in some places, I won't even see my colleagues because by definition, if I'm on being trauma doc, that means none of the other trauma docs are on. So I think that it's really different in business where the long relationships, the understanding nuances of what their situations are and building the rapport and the support, you may not realize what kind of support you're going to give, but one of my favorite quotes is, don't try to build a relationship when you need it. You know, you have to do that before.
Yeah. I'm going to write that one down. That's a goodie.
Well,
I think the quote is the best time to build a relationship is before you need it.
Right.
Yeah.
That's quote.
Amy is just spot on, you know, having that network and keeping it alive, which means just calling somebody out of the blue that you might not have talked to in a while. And, you know, in terms of, you know, I've been faced with numerous situations where I was not equipped to handle that on my own, but frankly, because networking has been so big in my career, it's been fairly easy to tap somebody on the shoulder and give them a holler, like Tiffany or some of the other folks I've mentioned on the call, Paul or Art or Lynn or, you know, whomever it might be, to say in their particular sector, right? You know, or Michelle Shields, you know, and reimbursement, things like that. Just pick up the phone and, you know, if they don't know, they'll refer me to somebody else, or, you know, and it's just this domino effect of getting to something. But here's the thing, you got to be persistent about it, right? You just don't sit in your office saying, oh my God, you know, the sky's falling, what am I going to do about it? Take action. And that action is pick up your phone and call somebody in a network, even if it's you know, a guess as who it could be.
Yeah. Yeah, just I keep coming back to this. It's been a thread and a theme for me as in the last couple of years is one tiny little action, one tiny little thing can open so many doors. It can have a tremendous effect. Just one tiny little email or one, you know, running into a neighbor and finding a spark of connectivity can change the trajectory of what you're trying to do so immensely. So it's I would recommend, of course, don't hesitate to put yourself out there in those situations.
Well, Allison, I'll give you that example that I talked about, you know, on our call last week, which was I happened to go to, this is a number of years ago, I happened to go to a Georgia Bio educational session on, I don't know if you all remember the federal program where they were doing the Drug Discovery Act, and they were giving grants out left and right. So I went to this Georgia Bio event to learn about it, and I'm sitting there, and again, I was relatively new back to the Atlanta area, and in the med tech field. So I'm sitting there listening. I'm going, nah, no way, you know, no way do I qualify that. I happened to be sitting next to a guy, didn't know who he was, and somehow we just sort of started talking, and he asked me to describe what was going on, and I said to him, you know, here's what's going on. And he says to me, no, you absolutely described. Turned out to be Art Spalding with TAMNet. He said, this is what I do. I will submit this grant for you. And he did that. And again, we worked a deal. I tell him, I have no cash. I can't help you. I need this money. Because this was very early on the ACT deal. And he said, well, I'll do it on a back end fee. And next thing I know, about, I don't know, 6 weeks later, I'm in my home office, the doorbell rings, it's FedEx, and I open up the envelope, and there's the award of $250,000 that really, you know, took us to the next step. But it was that one conversation, you know, that led to a stranger, that led to this series of dominoes that actually landed us $250,000 of funding.
And as the slowest entrepreneur ever, I will say that it's amazing how people grow up. And so in medicine, it's a much shorter time frame. So we're teaching residents, and in 6 years, some of them are going to be publishing amazing things and be good collaborators. Well, mentoring at Georgia State, mentoring at UGA, mentoring people who are still in college, 6 years is a very short period of time. And so the reaching back that you do, some of those connections have time to ricochet, not just paying it forward, but they also ricochet back and pay you back in shorter periods of time than you would imagine. So I think that it's also just in praise of the mantra of giving, because it's something when people tend to stay in one area, as people in Atlanta are more likely to do. And I think that that's a big part also of chance relationships that really are solid and bear fruit later on.
Right.
Absolutely.
Agreed.
Yeah. I love the resource talk because, you know, at least for many entrepreneurs that I've spoken with and many of the startups I've been at, just knowing where to start with some problems is a hard, you spend days trying to figure out how to just get make that one little tiny step. I wonder if there are any resources that you guys have discovered which you reflect on now and you say, why didn't I know this resource was out there 2 years ago when I needed it? Any surprise resources that you can think of in the Southeast that you wish that you had known were there at a certain point in your development?
I think I've spilled my resource beans.
Say it again?
I've spilled my resource beans already.
Oh.
I've given you all I got.
Yeah, you definitely provided us with some. Yeah, I mean, there are so many popping up at different times. I mean, I've heard people mention there's even some community-based gatherings where, even things that aren't related to healthcare, like TAG, for example. I've heard some of our medical device people say, I wish I had been tapped into TAG 2 years ago. That's where I should have been, networking to find the people that I needed. I mean, little things like that just happen to come up, and I didn't know if Paul, any that you think of off the top of your head?
Well, I think, you know, many of the associations that we've already mentioned have mentoring programs, and Amy kind of touched upon this. That is just a wealth of opportunity for anyone to tap into a new network, right? So Life Science of Tennessee has a mentoring network. Georgia Bio has a mentoring network. You know, just, you know, by default, SEMDA had a networking, you know, a mentor networking that you could go do with their beer and biotech, you know, type of events. And by the way, those are great ways to again, network and be surprised about it. I needed I was looking for a contract in Chattanooga. I was looking for a contract sales organization just to brainstorm about some things. I happened to go to a Life Science Tennessee beer and biotech kind of event and just sort of networking. Lo and behold, I found Harrison Bay Consultants or Life Sciences in Chattanooga. Didn't even know they were there, and that's led into, you know, working with them on a number of different things. So
Yeah.
again, it's all part of networking.
Yeah, agreed. You guys both have talked about this to some extent by now, and let me just ask you, do you have a mentor? And if so, could you share a little bit about how you set up that mentoring relationship and what that has meant to you in terms of your trajectory in these past, you know, whatever your timeline is for your company?
Yeah, I have many mentors. Tiffany certainly is one of the biggest ones. I think that also there's for me, my conception of what a mentor is different for different mentors. You know, I know somebody who was in the medical sales world for forever, and when I was out in, I think, getting some Thermo Fisher Award out in California, I was like, hey, you want to come with me? I've got a +1. And so, you know, building that relationship now, if I've got money I need to spend in medical device marketing, who you got that's in this specific kind of place with consumer devices and medical devices. But that kind of mentor relationship started actually with an email. And Tiffany started with a friendship, and other mentors have started really with LinkedIn. Just if you write a good email and be diligent about follow-up. I think one thing that's huge for startups in any field is that we feel so anointed in our passion and our purpose that we feel like just helping us should be reward enough, and we're not very good about the follow-up and the thank yous and the catching people up. So I think that that's the thing that's also really important, not just investors, but the people who have given you advice along the way to just periodically set them up with some information, or just to reach back out and say thank you. A guy named William Roth has a Bluefin consulting group he consults with pharma, and he helped a lot early on, and then met him again at an exponential medicine talk, and he mentioned me in a post just last week. You know, so that kind of ongoing relationship requires that you also keep looping back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Absolutely. How about you, Paul?
Yeah, so I have several mentors that I have been very fortunate to have in my life, and many of those started way back in my early career, and they're still with me today. And you know, if I got an issue, you know, I'll give a holler to Scott Adams or Leon Soriano or Keith Huzak, and these are all wildly successful folks who have, you know, really been around the block in med tech and healthcare services. But then I have another group, as I've kind of matured in the entrepreneurial space, where more collegiate, where you know, it's not a formal mentor-mentee relationship, but it's a colleague that I can give a holler to, you know, such as Tiffany or someone else, that we can brainstorm about, you know, whatever's going on in the arena at this point in time. And so a lot of those, you know, that just extends my network of influence on me, you know, on where I can get feedback as well. And then I think the last thing is I've now kind of morphed into, which I enjoy tremendously, is you know, being a mentor to others and paying it forward and trying to help out where I can and leverage some of my experiences, whether they're good, bad, or the ugly, you know, kind of thing. So.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting when you talk about the mentoring relationship, it's not always a structured relationship, right? It's not always something where you said, will you be my, you know, check the box, will you be my mentor? Check yes, check no. It's not necessarily set up that way, right?
Right,
So
right.
and I love what you're talking about collegiate, I think you called it collegiate mentoring.
Yeah.
That's something that it doesn't get talked about a lot, but it is a huge part of your, I mean, in what I've seen in my life, it's a huge part of people's success. Who they tap into, who they get advice from, those people are, that's really a huge part of your ecosystem. And those people become really, I don't know what the word is, but they're just fundamental in your success. So
Sure.
Really interesting. Someone should write an article about that in the chat window. Someone write an article about
Okay, there you go.
about this one. And then actually, before I move on to the next question, I want to encourage everyone on the panel, everyone on the attendee list. This is your chance. We have two incredibly experienced entrepreneurs here. They've taken the punches. They've been through a lot in terms of experiencing funding ups and downs, regulatory ups and downs. They've run the gamut at this point. And if you are struggling with an issue or you have a question that you think that they might be able to help you with, by all means, put it into the chat window. I know they'd be happy to do anything that they could while they're on the phone to be able to answer that question. And of course, you also have the entire Southeast Life Sciences group to tap into here. I mean, you've got some big heavy hitters on the call here with Tiffany and Jason and all the panelists that we have here, as well as I've noted several people that are on our attendee list who are also quite big heavy hitters. So you got a great network to tap into. If you're having any questions or issues that you'd like help with, by all means, put those into the chat window. Okay. So moving on to the next question that I had for you guys. Let's talk about once you're a panelist, so once you've started a company and you are, I remember several of these that I've been at, the getting to commercialization, or, you know, not just $1, but to a point where you can actually keep a good cash flow coming in. That is a huge milestone, and it's one that we always have to keep our eyes on, because at some point we have to be, you know, we have to flip the switch and be self-sufficient and not be relying on funding anymore. So what advice could you give to the people on the phone and Zoom here about minimizing the time to commercialization? What guidance would you give them, you know, reflecting on your own experience?
I mean, things that people have told me that I think are reasonable is to not wait until you're at 90% of the product before you go to market, because trying to get to 90, 100% of the place where you are, you'll never get there, or somebody else will get there before you, or you'll go through all your cash. So someone also told me at one point that if you're not embarrassed about your first product, then you went to market too late. And I think that that's interesting, because we have actually come back again and again. We keep thinking we're going to go past this, and we keep coming back to this design. I mean, we've been in constant production of this. Even though we've iterated around it, it's still really been a pivot point. That said, I think that in general, it is true that once you start, you'll find out where your market really is, and that will require you to make some modifications.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, again, going back to the adage, cash is king, you know, and you can, you know, you only have so much runway with a particular round, and raising money is just exhausting, you know, just absolutely exhausting. And it's difficult. And even if you've got the best team, the best product, it's hard no matter what, especially today, right? So anything you can do to think about accelerating the product development and getting to the point where you're generating real cash flow from recurring sales or the product, is what you need to be thinking about from the get-go. And I think we talked about this in a number of the, I think the med device market has changed. 6, 7, 8 years ago, you used to have a great idea and maybe get over your regulatory clearance, or maybe you get a patent issued and somebody comes and scoops you up right then and there, and you don't have to commercialize, right? So, but that's, in my opinion, that's completely changed. These days, you've got to be thinking from the get-go as you're developing your business model that you are going to need to commercialize to a certain degree from the get-go. And when you think about your funding, think about raising some money to do that, how you put, even if it's a small contracted sales teams together, to be able to start as quickly as possible to begin generating that revenue. Obviously, once your product is ready, depending on what that product is, ready to go. And because it's really hard to change your model in midstream, I can tell you that. And to go from one where you expect to just license the product out and let somebody else run with it, to doing it yourself, two different, very different strategies. And it's hard to make that pivot.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that to add to that, which is absolutely true, even within the decision that you're making it yourself, I think that we would have been benefited by doing a lot more customer discovery in different channels, because we were pretty sure the channel that was going to be buzzy was going to be doctors, and took us a long time to figure out that they don't care about whether patients have pain. And we certainly weren't thinking about physical therapy, or the fact that if you can block a needle pain, knee pain is easy. And so all of those different aspects of customer discovery, I think one of the biggest mistakes that I hear from people who are starting is that they actually build into their plan throwing spaghetti at the wall. And if you are completely disruptive, if you are brand new, then whether I'm giving myself an easy out, or whether I'm saying, okay, maybe in that circumstance, if it's something truly disruptive, but if not, there are going to be channels, there are going to be 1099 reps, there are going to be people that are putting you in relax the back showrooms, there are going to be online, there are going to be DME stores, there are going to be even within a class 2 or class 3 product, there are going to be, are you going to go to the hospital administrators, or are you going to go to the supply chain people, are you going to go to quality? But I think that is really where I would spend the most time up front, regardless of what your product is really testing all of those different channels to find out who's excited, who has a market pain that you're going to be addressing. Even if you've got a fantastic product for a bladder stent, if the surgeons aren't interested, it's not going to take off. Even if they're interested, if it's not going to help supply chain, it's not going to take off.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and interesting, I have noted particularly in the past couple of years, with a substantial shift of the care moving into the post-acute setting, that's another place where I'm finding entrepreneurs are getting tripped up, because they're thinking a lot of that is still happening in the inpatient setting, but yet it may be worthwhile to consider the outpatient setting for some early part of your launch. And the other thing that I think has always stuck with me, I was a part of a company here in Atlanta called CardioMEMS early on, and the proprietor Jay Yadav and the two proprietors, Jay Yadav and Mark Allen, decided to take an approach that was notable because it wasn't what they had intended to do. Let me explain. The idea was to develop an implant that would go into the heart to help them monitor heart failure. But considering the huge and time-consuming barriers to getting to that point, they decided to actually commercialize it in a different space in the vascular world to kind of prove out the technology and eliminate some of the risk associated with that long-term investment. And so I thought that was also an interesting approach to commercialization. They were able to commercialize earlier, kind of proving the concept, and then that also helped not only get them some dollars coming in, revenue from their devices, but also reinforce to the investors that there was less risk. So there are a couple of different ways you can approach it, I think.
Well, I'd add one thing to that. So I would, at ACT, our business model was to develop our targeted liquid drug delivery catheter to a certain stage gate, and then exit by either selling the technology or out licensing it. And we did that. And back in 2015, received a large strategic investment from one of the big players, but a international player. And that led into a large licensing deal. So we thought we had done it. And for several years, we were cash flow positive, didn't need to raise any money, didn't think about it. And we sort of got relaxed about it and said, okay, we're done. I started actually distributing to investors, and things were feeling good, right? And then that relationship didn't work out so well, right? And so all of a sudden you thought you were done and you weren't done. So I guess a piece of advice is just to, don't rest easy, even if you think you've got that ultimate deal done, and be thinking about the commercialization side to your product or your service, during that time frame.
I think that's really true. I think there's so many licensing deals that come to this close, and then, we had one where on the very last day when it was supposed to be signed, the persons who had agreed that they would be using our technology for sports, but they weren't going to be selling to hospitals, ASCs, medical things. And so, so we've got our whole product line, we're ready to go. And they're on the last day, they're like, oh yeah, by the way, some of our sports people also do med tech, so we need to add medical salespeople in there as something we're allowed to do.
Right.
And to let the entire deal crash because of 2 words that they wanted to push in at the last minute, really just crushing. Yeah. But interesting that you can get super close, and it's nice to know we're not the only ones, Paul.
Thanks, Amy. Well, we actually, we dove into we actually signed. Mm-hmm. And the good news is, and again, I got some advice from my network, frankly. Again, I don't mean to name drop, but Paul on Gianeski, helped me with some of this, and we put some stipulations in the licensing agreement to protect us. And I never thought I would have to call upon those things, and we ended up having to do that, and we were doing very well for a couple of years, but then things just don't always work out as you think, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so true, so true. Yeah, so related to that, let's talk a little bit about payment, because I heard Amy mention it earlier. So I had the pleasure, I'm not sure, of being involved heavily in attaining reimbursement for a few products over the course of my career. And I think the landscape is so complex, and there's so much expertise. Like literally, you may want to get a reimbursement expert, but there is no such thing. People have expertise within reimbursement, within very specific areas in reimbursement. And then there's experts of the detail of what it takes to get a HCPCS code in one specific area. I mean, it can get so narrow so fast. And so, from that perspective, how would you recommend that people could fast forward their learning on that front, and also be able to figure out the fastest way to figure out the path for their particular device most effectively? And maybe you could share a little bit about what you would do differently if you feel like you haven't done that well so far, or you hadn't had a good experience over the course at some point in your career.
Yeah, I mean, we're going for the 2021 de novo HCPCS code, but it's its own little mini course. So it started that if you're doing something that is like what someone else has done, you can go to PDAC and PDAC will assign you the same codes that you go for if you can prove you're substantially equivalent, which is different from like a predicate device in the FDA. It's a, you know, operationally equivalent. Although then it turns out that they don't really have a good place for science that is new. So for example, recently I was talking to Blue Cross Blue Shield's Evidence Street, which is a group that evaluates evidence on all sorts of different medical devices. Well, there isn't a mechanical stimulation device. There's not a mechanical stimulation pain segment. And so one of the things that's been interesting is, even though we've got a group that we're planning to go with for doing our de novo HCPCS code, they're in electrical stimulation. And so I think that we're still not comfortable that they get what we're doing, even though it's as niche and drilled down as specific TENS unit reimbursement. So, so I don't think we've done well yet. I think that the field in CPT codes is changing rapidly. I went to a meeting for that. I have never found a more wretched hive of scum and villainy. So much willingness to get me a meeting with the right person if I'll pay $20,000 to get my paperwork in order. And it's like, well, actually, I already have my paperwork in order because this, they're like, yes, it'll take $20,000 to get your paperwork in order to get a meeting. I mean, just bald-faced, just amazing.
Wow.
I'm perhaps too jaded to answer this question well right now because I have not done a successful job of getting reimbursement. I do think that COVID is helping to switch some of the processes. And I definitely think that many of the designations that were set up were done in the mid-70s, and science has changed a lot since then. And so, you know, it's not the same thing as reimbursement, but we're getting additional indications added to our FDA indications. And one of the things that our devices do, it turns out, is decrease fear. So needle fear is a huge thing when you're talking about vaccination compliance, when you're talking about COVID, when you're talking about needleless injectors and all those things. Turns out none of them actually decrease fear. We do. And initially the FDA came back and said, well, we're biomechanical devices. We're not in the psych area. And so we're not going to talk about that, until one of the people who was a PM&R rehab guy said in the meeting, in the Q subs, you can file stuff, you can file for meetings and get help, but we're in this Q sub meeting, and he said, well, I'm not sure how you can separate pain from fear. And we're like, exactly, you're the man. So it changed the whole discussion. So I think that things are changing, but right now there's a very rigid number of categories. And so the way that things are reimbursed is getting sliced and diced because the budgets are changing around with COVID.
Yeah.
I'd love to know what Paul did.
So think about it again, and coming back to what Ezra said earlier, you're doing something that hasn't been done before. You're blazing a new path, and that happens so frequently for entrepreneurs like yourself. Great, you're a great person to learn from on that front. Paul, we just got a couple more minutes, and then we're going to have to wrap up, but I'd love to hear your perspective as well on that front.
Yeah, I would just say, you know, coming from the perspective of a new entrepreneur who's now started their company, the two things you need to do earlier than later is, one, really identify your regulatory path, you know, get that assessment, know exactly what that's going to take all the way through clinical trial, because then that's going to affect your fundraising. But part and parcel to that, and the handshake can be reimbursement side. Get a good reimbursement consultant in there to assess, you know, are there existing codes that you can piggyback onto? Do you have to go after your own CPT code? What's that path like? What's that going to cost you? You know, is it, as Amy said, is it going to be the wink and the nod and the 20 grand, or is it going to be 200 grand? And again, you know, everything's cash is king. So early and often. Now, maybe you hire them to outline that pathway for you, and you sit on it until the time is right. But at least you know it is, and you're planning for it, and you can hit that running at the right inflection point.
Love it. Great experience. You guys have shared so much today, and I'm glad this is recorded because it's been a very meaty conversation, and so many people might want to go back and listen to it again. This has been a really great joy for me. I feel so honored to have been asked to have this panel with the two of you, legends in the Atlanta entrepreneurial world. So thank you so much for all you've contributed. I do want to just, before we sign off for today, I want to just give you a quick introduction to what's happening and what's coming up tomorrow. So you guys let me know when you can see my screen. You guys see my screen?
Yep.
You can, yep.
We have a really exciting day coming tomorrow from 2 o'clock to 4 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. It's a very small window. I hope that you'll join us again. Tomorrow, I'll just do a quick opening and we have some surprise announcements. You'll just have to wait and join tomorrow at 2 to hear. And then you're going to get to hear from Dr. Michelle McMurray-Heath, who's the president and CEO of Biotechnology Innovation Organization. I think you guys are going to be really blown away by her presentation, and we welcome her with open arms. I'm thrilled to have her tomorrow. So I'm going to encourage you guys to jump in tomorrow and join our conversation resuming at 2 p.m. on Wednesday, September the 9th. Jason, anything else that we need to share before we sign off for the day?
No, I think we're good.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much. Reach out to your networks, tap into the people on the call. We have a much bigger network now that we're Southeastern Life Sciences in total. So I encourage you to use every single corner of it. Thank you all so much. Have a great
Thanks,
afternoon.
Allison. Bye.
See you tomorrow.
Bye, Amy. Bye, Jason.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Bye-bye.